G'day. Today's video is about this workshop step that I made up. I mentioned to a friend of mine that I was looking for a little bit of aluminium plate to make up a small step for the workshop, and Crane came through rather quickly, so left me no choice but to make up a step. So that's what we're doing today. So I've started off by getting my sheet material and trimming to the edge. I've decided I want to have this thing kicked in 15 degrees. So I've got 15 degrees there, 15 degrees there. I'll get to these lines in a minute. But my foot is going to be 70 wide. So what I'm doing here is I've just put a centre punch in, and I'm going to put a hole in there. And the hole's going to help me with cutting this, but it's also going to relieve stress in the corner there. Not that this is a terribly high stress part, but it's something worth thinking about. Or happy to get into. The diameter of that hole is going to be basically twice the thickness of the plate. It can be any size you like, but I find that twice the thickness it's a nice rule of thumb that you can use. I could make that 10 if I wanted to. This is 2mm plate, but I'm going to put some holes there so I can cut, and then I can do some folding. So this is a long side, but here I've got the holes in there for my stress relief and corner cutout. Now the nice thing about these is that they help you do your cut, and I'll show you that over here. When cutting with a set of shears like this, one of the important things is to know where the end of the cut is in relation to the blade. I've said before that the way you start a cut is you come along and you put a bit of a notch in there to anchor that, and then you line it up. Now if this was a long sheet, I'd get a steel rule out and use that to, can't see that, to line up on the cut. When you're cutting something like this, if you're going straight across, you can see the other edge of the blade. But for want of a better term, a blind cut, it's a little bit more difficult. However, because you've got that hole there, you can see that. And so what I'm doing here is I've got my line marked out, I've got my hole in there, I've notched the end there, and now I can just line that up, the scribe line on the edge of the blade. I can see through the hole. I can cut that, cut the other one, take that triangle out, and I'll be right. And the other nice thing about having that hole there is that when I cut, I'm not going to necessarily be damaging the inside of the other side of the material there. So there's my cutout piece there. It goes right up to the hole. Very easy. This bit comes out relatively simply too, because I don't have to wiggle it around. So this piece has got my first fold in it. So I've as you can see, cut one fold there, and then this is going to come up at 45 degrees, and the reason for that is I want that to be sitting on my top piece and have reasonable sort of strength. That's going to brace that up as well as giving them a bit of a handhold. I may put some bracing across the inside of the corners as well, just to stiffen those up, but I figure if I do this, I'm going to have a pretty solid sort of step. To put this first bend in here, I'm using the little vice brake that I've got. For this particular bend, I had to take a segment out and then straighten out the corner. It was either that or cut this off, and I didn't want to do that. You can use these to bend this stuff when it's longer than. What you've got to do is basically start in a spot and then work your way over. If you try to bend this completely to 90 degrees, it won't work. You'll crease everything up. So what you've got to do is start here, bend it a little bit, move over here, bend it a little bit, back and forth until you get your angle you want. And it actually works out quite nicely, because once you've put a bend or two in there, the bending punch, whatever you want to call it, locates pretty well. So it's not a big deal. My vice brake has given me a 90-degree angle there, but I actually need that kicked over 15 to compensate for for this being on 15, so that's basically flat. So what I've done is I've put this in my finger brake, clamped it down, and then just used a mallet to gently work my way along until I get that to the angle that I want it to. So I'm going to do that to all 4 pieces. Pretty straightforward. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that into there on my bend line, fold that, and then fold that up so that this piece comes up at a 45-ish degree angle, right? And that way when I weld this up, I can put a seam on the outside, I can put a seam on the inside, and I'll be just that little bit more secure. Onto my welding bench now. I've got I think that's called a rafter square. It's basically a large square, but for me I'm just using it to true the corners up. I've got a small piece of bent metal in there which I've bent to around about the right angle, so that this line is square. I can tack that corner, do all 4 corners, and make sure that I've got my base, you know, pretty much square. It's going to need a bit of manipulation. These 2 fins, whatever you want to call them, flanges, not at the same height, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of work on that, but that's all right. And having the bends in there to start with does help, because it means you've got somewhere to work from. So this one's got to come down a little bit, and I think this one's got to come up a little bit. But once everything's in place, I can then flip it over, check all that, do a bit of bending, manipulation, and go from there. So here my 4 pieces tacked together, just a couple of tacks top and bottom. It's great temptation to weld, you know, the corners fully, but that's not going to work if you have to manipulate a little bit. This way, everything's just where I want it to be. I'm quite surprised how well that worked out. This way, it's down, maybe 6 millimeters. So I just need to do a little bit of a bend on that, tweak on that, just to bring that up. I guess if I had the choice between having to bend this one up and bend this one up, these are the ones I prefer to bend up. Once I have that flat, I'll then get the top. I'll tack the top in place and make sure everything's where it needs to be, and then I'll fully weld it. Now, I discovered that some of my cutting wasn't all that flash, and so I've got a slight mismatch there. If you're ever in that situation, it's better to get the longest edge matching and worry about the shorter edge than the other way around, because you know, I'd much prefer to just cut a small sliver off that rather than have to try and cut a large piece off that. So just a tip there is that, yeah, if you do find yourself in that situation, just you know, leave it so that it's the shortest cut that you have to alter. I've come along, I've put a few tacks along here, you know, one every 100 millimeters or so. I've discovered the hard way, but also told by someone who should know, that, you know, when you're doing a job like this, the more tacks you can put in, the less likely things are to move. Now that I've got everything tacked up, I can then come along and weld all the seams. The supports in the bottom there are just where I want them to be. They're just touching there. I can clamp that down easily enough. Once I've got everything else welded up, I'll do these. These are twofold. These are to stiffen it up, but also so there's a decent place to put a hand without having to worry about sharp edges and all that sort of thing. It doesn't feel at the moment like I need to put anything across there, but I could in the future. But we'll worry about welding the seams up first. I've finished welding the outside seams and the leg seams, so that's all good. If you wanted to, I guess you could put a bit of weld in the little holes there. That's still rather hot, but it's all welded. It's solid. Now I need to weld the underside seams. I won't do a full weld, but I'll put a few spots there just to link those upstand, shall we say, into the top of the stool here, to give it that extra rigidity. It's quite good at the moment, actually. I'm surprised how rigid it is, but that'll just give it an extra heavy dutiness, which is always a good idea in a workspace. Apologies in advance if some of these welds look a bit ropey. accidentally increased the balance rather than increase the amps, and it didn't quite work well. Anyway, I've got 4 tacks along these long ones and 2 on the small ones, and that's just enough to give it a bit of stiffness. So that is quite a solid sort of step, and when you think about what these stiffeners are doing here, they're basically supporting it here. So the unsupported piece of plate is only about that wide rather than the full 250 millimeters. But there you go. So I hope that's been of interest. I'm a self-learning welder, so if I can do these sorts of things, then I think other people can as well. It's turned out all right. It'll do what I want it to do. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.